Divas, welcome back. Oh, goody gosh, I'm so excited. This week's episode, I must have aged really badly because he walked right by me and asked me where he could find Dara Cam, and we've known each other for, I think, almost 20 years. But that's okay. Seth Miller, Executive Director of the Innocence Project of Florida. Oh, you are going to love this episode. We talk about the work that he and his colleagues do to help people who've been wrongly incarcerated get out of prison. And not just that, you'll be surprised to hear what else the Innocence Project does. I know I was. We'll hear about a case that has received a lot of international attention. Leo Schofield, that was the Bone Valley podcast. Seth Miller played a significant role in helping Leo Schofield get released from prison after decades of being wrongfully incarcerated for not killing his wife. Just want to give a little bit of a warning about the content of some of the crimes that we discuss. So there won't be graphic detail about it, but just a content warning. Please join me today for a deeper dive with Seth Miller, Executive Director of the Innocence Project of Florida.
The cases that go deep into my core are the ones that we open that letter that they wrote to us however many years before. And so to be with a person sometimes for a decade or more through all the ups and downs and the roller coaster of wins and losses and progress and setbacks to get to that point, it's something else. It's really hard to describe because it's a feeling of accomplishment and relief.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara Cam, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
Divas, we are back in the speakeasy today with my special guest, Seth Miller. He is the Executive Director of the Innocence Project of Florida. He is one of my way backs. He is one of my OGs. We go way back. Yeah, he was asking me if I was still covering the Capitol. He said it in a very nice way, but I kind of got a little bit defensive. But welcome to a deeper dive, Seth.
Thanks, Dara. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
It's really nice to see you IRL. He's also advertising for Tallahassee Beer Society. He's wearing a really neat sweatshirt, Drink Tallahassee Beer. So
it is. It's just the one I pulled out.
Just happened to be a little chilly today as we're recording this. So let's start with you giving our listeners a little introduction to the Innocence Project of Florida, what you guys do, and what your role is there.
Sure. The Innocence Project of Florida is a nonprofit justice organization based here in Tallahassee, and our mission is to find innocent, wrongfully convicted people in Florida's prisons, and we free them with new evidence of actual innocence. Used to be that when you and I first met many years ago, that we were only doing cases that relied on new DNA test results that demonstrated innocence, but we've now moved in for the past almost decade and a half to any evidence of innocence that can overturn a wrongful conviction. And so once we get people out of prison, and we've gotten 34 individuals out, spent over 770 years in prison for crimes they didn't commit in our 21 years, we help those individuals transition back into free society. And it's, usually a society that is way different than the one that they left decades, sometimes almost as much as 40 or more years before. And then the area where I mostly cross paths with you is really the third prong of our mission, which is to reform systems to prevent wrongful convictions before they happen, or to get accountability or recompense for those who have been wrongfully convicted and released. So I think probably the first time I crossed paths with you was probably in like 2008 or something, when we were trying to get a compensation bill passed for people who were freed from wrongful incarceration.
They used to have to do a claims bill, right? I remember Wilton Dedge.
Yeah, and that was in, I think, 2005.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, gosh, because I remember meeting him, and he was this teeny tiny guy and thinking of him incarcerated for all those many years for a crime he did not commit. Not that it's a pleasant place for anyone, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He was just a very small frame guy. The reason he stands out to me is I think he was one of the first guys I met who was being shepherded around the Capitol as they were trying I don't know how many years it took, but to get a claims bill because before they passed the compensation law, which I want you to get to, that was how they had to do it, right? That was how you had to do it.
Yeah, I mean, so Wilton got exonerated in 2004 out of Brevard County, and you're right, he is of diminutive stature.
Right?
He's also, I would say, a heavily emotional guy, so I can't imagine how much harder prison was for him than a lot of other people. And so because we didn't have a compensation law at the time, he had to hire a lawyer. He hired Sandy Dallenberg, who's
that's right.
Now, has since passed away, but also a lobbyist, Guy Spearman, who so he had a sort of the dream team, and he was thankfully
because Guy's from Brevard County. Yeah,
that's right, and so he was able to, within a year and a half of getting out, get compensated. But we realized that does everyone have to hire a Sandy Dallenberg and a Guy Spearman in order to get compensated?
Right.
And there's going to be more of these men and now women that come down the pike, and it became clear that we can't continue to allow recompense for the wrongfully convicted and incarcerated to be based on whether there's political will in the legislature. We had to try to pass a bill to streamline the process to make it easier for folks to get compensated.
Yeah, because have been some legislative leaders who did not allow claims bills to pass. So those if you got out and you were trying to get compensation, if you were wrongfully incarcerated, you would have to wait until they're in office, they're in leadership for 2 years. So that would have been a 2-year delay for you, right? So, and it's not just death penalty cases. You don't just do death penalty cases, right?
Yeah, at the Innocence Project of Florida, we mostly don't do death penalty cases. And that's just a natural product of the fact that here in Florida, folks who are on death row have counsel available to them during the process that we do our work in. So it's really just an allocation of resources. We want to use the limited resources we have for the people who don't have access to high quality care.
I think what you mean is they have the CCRCs. They have the state pays for really expert legal assistance for capital cases. They have just agencies that's all they handle.
That's right.
So they're kind of like specialized public defenders, only they are called capital collateral.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, and in fact, there's 300 something people on death row.
Yes.
But there's 80 something thousand people in the general population. And so really, when you think about it, if you focused only on death penalty cases where those folks have counsel available to them, in as many cases high quality counsel, perhaps it would be a misfocus of our resources. So we want to really try to have the greatest reach possible to help as many people possible.
That's good. I'm glad I asked that. How do you decide? I know you're laughing because this is an obvious question, but it's an important question. How do you decide which cases to take?
It's a really unbelievable question, and it's what I get asked all the time.
I'm sure.
Because, you think, well, we have so many people in prison. We have about 1,000 people who newly write us, them or their family members, every year asking for help.
So see, you're doing what I love when they do. You're answering the question before I ask. So, about 1,000 a year reach out to you, huh?
Yeah, and we only take about 10 to 12 new cases a year, sometimes less, sometimes more. And so that's 98 to 99% that we say no to. And so, on the top, there are certain types of cases we don't take. We don't do federal cases. We don't generally do drug cases. We don't do cases where people are claiming, I did the thing, but I have a legal justification.
Okay, no, it's somebody who did not do the crime and was really, truly wrongfully convicted.
Correct.
Not convicted the wrong way.
Correct. And there's another subset of cases that we're also interested in, which is situations, and this is often the case in like arson cases or these child abuse cases that are dependent on a shaken baby syndrome theory. These are cases where there are oftentimes scientific or medical explanations for the fire or for the child's condition, that suggests that this isn't, that the child's death or the fire and arson case is not actually a crime, that it's an accident or has some other non-criminal cause, which means that not that a crime happened and someone else did it, but rather that no crime happened at all, and you can't be
that's a different.
you can't be
Right.
guilty of something that's not a crime. And
Right.
so we call them no crime cases. But the point is in that in our review of cases, right,
Yes.
from the first letter all the way through our stringent review process, which can oftentimes take a year or two, we're looking for things that we know cause wrongful convictions, improper identification procedures, coercive interrogation tactics, use of junk science,
Eyewitness.
eyewitness
Testament.
misidentification,
Yeah.
these sorts of things as a way to sift cases and decide we want to look, this has hallmarks of a wrongful conviction, we want to look more into this versus things that, I mean, the person might be innocent, but it doesn't appear there's anything to hook onto.
And really, there are 10 to 12 cases a year in Florida that reach that threshold for your review.
There's more than that.
Wow.
And again, those are just the people who write us.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that every case
But that's how, I mean, they reach out to you. Is that how you get your cases?
primarily.
Sometimes, would it be a lawyer of theirs or a family member? Who is it? Somebody who is imprisoned? How did they reach out to you?
Most of the inquiries come from an individual in prison. And,
Okay.
and unless there's some impairment that doesn't allow for it, we really need to hear from the person who
Right.
is the would-be client. But it could be that their family members reaching out to us from the outside. Now it used to be that we would get faxes. Now it's all on social media.
Right.
It could be that a lawyer, and this happens, and this is meaningful to us. A lawyer says, look, I've been a criminal defense attorney for 20 years, and I have rarely thought there's someone who I represented who is innocent, but I'm reaching out to you because I lost this case. They lost their appeal and they need help, and I believe in this person innocent. That's meaningful to us. It can also be that we see the case in the media
Right.
or in the cases that come out. So, for example, it's a funny story. This is in 2009 in May. I was on my way to Thailand with my wife, and I don't know if they still do it this way, but there's this thing called Florida Law Weekly, which is it's a weekly periodical that has all of the appellate cases that come out. And I was reading it because I brought like a whole stack. I was behind, so I'm going on a.
Seth's a lawyer, by the way.
Yeah, I'm going on like 20 hours of flights. I'm going to just put these in my backpack and start reading
a
them.
little casual vacation read.
And so I'm like, I'm on my way to Seoul, South Korea on the plane. And I read about the case of James Bain, that this is a guy who had tried to get DNA testing 3 times previously.
Oh, yeah.
And the court finally said, you need to give this guy a hearing. And I knew that if it went back to the court in Bartow, Florida, that he probably would not succeed on his own. And so I get to Seoul, South Korea, in Polk County. I get to Seoul, South Korea. I call my office. I say, I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks. You figure everything you can out about this case, and we'll talk when we get back. And they figured it out in 3 weeks. And, we took on his representation, and by December, we had him out exonerated. And
Wow.
So
and I'm looking him up on your website right now.
he spent 35 years in prison for a rape of a child that he didn't commit.
35 years.
Mm-hmm.
Polk County, man.
It's a strange place.
You can't even start. We're going to get to another Polk County case.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
That you are highlighting that I've heard a lot about. I'm going to try to get Gilbert on the show.
You should.
I should. Florida has the most exonerate. Is that still true? At one point, I think Florida had more exonerations than. Oh, is it death row exonerations?
It's death row exonerations.
Death row
it's somewhere in the high
exonerations.
30s now,
Yeah.
maybe even 40.
Yeah.
Places like Illinois and New York and Texas, I probably have more exonerations, but it's not necessarily indicative of our system being better or theirs being worse. It's they have, I think, a longer history of efforts by people like us here in Florida, like they've had there.
More rigorous conviction review.
Certainly in more recent years, efforts by prosecutors to overturn wrongful convictions as well. And so, they've made a little more headway, even in places like Texas, in putting in place legislation that helps prevent wrongful convictions. And so, the problem is pretty deep and prevalent everywhere.
So you're nonpartisan, right? And
Yeah, that's
you're
right.
a nonprofit organization.
Yep.
And how do you get most of your funding?
We're like any other nonprofit organization. We have a diversified revenue portfolio of sources that consist of large and small private foundations. We have currently and have had a number of grants from the federal government, out of the Department of Justice, and through justice.
I'm not laughing. I'm just saying, all that might change.
Well, I mean, it's funny. It's funny. This is the nonpartisan part of me, which is that the funds that are in place now for wrongful conviction work out of the Department of Justice were from the 2004 Justice for All Act, which was passed and then signed by George W. Bush, funded for the first time under Obama, and maintained in the first Trump administration.
Okay.
And so we'll see.
All right. Well, so that shows you how much I know. That's why I'm sitting on this side of the Diva desk and you're sitting over there. That's why we have our guests to inform us.
But we have a lot of support through interest on our trust account funds through what is now called the Funding Florida Legal Aid, formerly Florida Bar Foundation.
Oh, right, right.
And so we're considered a legal aid organization, much like the civil legal aid organizations.
Right.
And like any other nonprofit, we have to garner the support of companies and individuals who want to support, and invest in truth and justice. So we raise a lot of money from generous individuals in Florida and all across the country.
Tell us about the law that you helped pass, and Sandy too worked on that law, the wrongful incarceration compensation law.
Yeah, so in 2000, and to be clear, it was worked by people even before 2008. My predecessor, Jenny Greenberg, who you might remember.
I remember Jenny,
and many others who understood the need to have a streamlined procedure and not leave, whether you get compensated up to whether the leadership of the legislative houses supports you, whether the governor is going to sign the bill.
Yeah.
And so, in 2008, we passed a bill for the first time to have that streamlined procedure. And there's many good aspects to the bill. It provided $50,000 a year for each year that the person was wrongfully incarcerated, 4 years of tuition at a community college, state college, or university, or trade school, paid for, back attorney's fees and things like that you might have expended to defend against your wrongful conviction.
Yes.
But it had a big flaw.
I know.
And the big flaw was that at the time, and this was a compromise, it was
the only way you could get it passed.
Yeah, the leaders of the legislature said to us, look, you're not getting this bill unless you include what we called a clean hands provision, which said if the person had been convicted of another felony conviction that was unrelated but prior to their wrongful conviction, they could not then be compensated if they were subsequently wrongfully convicted and later exonerated. And it seemed nutty then, and it seemed totally nutty now. The reason that we said, okay, we're going to go forward is because we had people who were waiting for that compensation.
Sure.
And, it's hard to look someone in the face and say, your stability, your transition back into free society is going to be frustrated because we want the perfect bill. And we got some assurances at the time that we would, that we'd be able to come back and fix it the next year. And that was in 2008.
I can't believe that it was 2008 when that bill was passed, because I covered it. So
yeah, like you remember Arthenia Joyner.
Yes.
Was one of
there was a lot of. She was very critical of the clean. I'm using air quotes now with the clean hands provision.
Of course, hindsight's 2020. But I mean, I think if you had asked me then, okay, Seth, if you accept this and move forward, do you think you're going to be? How long do you think it's going to take you to get it fixed? I would have said, well, maybe not next year, but a couple years. And here we are in 2024 going into the 2025 session. And we were able to make some slight adjustments to the bill to lessen the impact of clean hands provision a little bit, but it's still there to a large degree. And so we've made tons of progress over the years. At times we passed entire houses of the legislature to remove it, but we've never been able to get the whole legislature.
Do you think you will?
I think we're in a really good position this year. We have great sponsors, Republican Tracy Koster in the House and Republican Jennifer Bradley in the Senate.
Oh, Jen Bradley.
Yeah.
She's I'm a huge Jen Stan, yeah.
They're great advocates for the work that we're doing and for this issue in particular. And I think we have support within the leadership of both houses, but you can feel a certain way before session. It has to see how things shake out.
Well, you also have Governor Ron DeSantis too. So you have a governor who has not been very friendly to criminal justice reform bills. I mean, he vetoed a bill that I think it passed unanimously in the House and Senate last year that would have allowed formerly incarcerated individuals to pay in-state tuition. And that he vetoed. So that's another hurdle. What would the bill do that you have the sponsors for this year?
So the bill would completely remove the clean hands provision, and it would fix some vagaries in the statute of limitations to both. I'm not going to go into the details because it's
there's lots to talk about.
It would make it such that people would have more time to file for the compensation after their exoneration, as well as just.
Do they have a limited amount of time now?
90 days.
Holy cow, I forgot about that.
Yeah. And so
you're learning how I'm thinking of the gentleman who passed this year who had been incarcerated for 42 years.
Clifford Williams.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're released. You've never used a cell phone before, or if you have, you had to do it on the down-low while you were inside, right? But you're navigating cable TV and cell phones and the internet. And again, not that they don't have access to these things in prison, but the world outside is very different after 40 years or 20 years or 10 years than it was when you were first incarcerated.
Yeah, it's completely different. And I think just giving folks a little more time to make sure that they can get their affairs in order, get advocacy in forms of a lawyer to help them, and not miss that window.
Yeah.
And there's some other fixes in it too, but the point is it would, and to go back to something you said earlier, I'm optimistic. I mean, we've had a number of individuals during Governor DeSantis' time as governor, during his administration, that have filed wrongful incarceration claims bills that have passed the legislature, and he signed them. And so
the claims bills.
Mm-hmm.
So they were not eligible
Correct.
for under the law, like I guess it would be called not automatic, but they wouldn't be eligible for that compensation under the law. But he did sign them. That's good.
Yeah, they were barred because of prior felonies. They were under the clean hands provision, and yet he signed their claims.
Oh, that's good.
Compensated.
That makes me hopeful.
Yeah, me too.
I'm a glass half empty gal, so I'm. Is there an average time for a case after you decide to take it? Is there an average length of time before someone gets exonerated?
There's not really an average time. I mean, I would say that the James Bain case, which I referenced earlier, was the fastest that we've ever got accomplished in 8 months.
Yeah.
And the longest was just this year. My client Billy Holton from Jacksonville, he was the first case that I got when I entered the project as a young staff attorney in 2006.
Wow.
And we fully resolved this case. Conviction vacated, charges dropped in October of this year.
Wow.
2024. And so that's 18 years. That's not the hope is not that it takes that long, to make it work.
Do you want to tell us about that?
It's kind of unremarkable in the sense that it's a multi-perpetrator sexual battery case from 1986 in Jacksonville. And our client was convicted as the only one of the perpetrators that the victim saw, and that he was the one who left semen on the victim. And we were able to do DNA testing that showed that semen wasn't his. Mm-hmm. And yet it just took forever. We had so many fits and starts. We got denied in the trial court. We had to go up and overturn that on appeal. We came back, and there was some just legal hiccups that delayed us. And then we ended up in COVID and then
Oh,
we came out of
goodness.
COVID, and so it took us a long time to
Wow.
get where we needed to go. He had spent 25 years in, 10 years out on sex offender probation, even though he was wrongfully convicted of the sex offense,
Right.
and finished that. And then we were able to finally get his conviction overturned in July of 2024, and the charges dropped in October.
Well, congratulations on that. The other case that we want to talk about a little bit, I alluded to it when I said, when I spoke about Gilbert King, Leo Schofield.
Mm-hmm.
You were involved in that case. Tell us how did you hear the podcast, or were you on that before the podcast? Or?
I've been one of his lawyers for a number of years.
Oh, okay. All right. Tell me all about your involvement in that case, and tell us about that case. And if you guys have not listened to that podcast, it is just heart-wrenching.
Yeah. So, and I'll just, before I forget, the podcast is Bone Valley.
I'm sorry. I should have plugged it. Yes. Bone Valley.
And you can,
I've listened. I've listened to all of it. Yeah.
and as they say, you can listen to Bone Valley wherever you get your podcast.
Same as here on Deeper Dive.
And so, so Leo Schofield's case.
And I did hear you on the podcast too.
He was convicted of a 1987 murder of his wife.
Polk County,
in Polk County, Florida, and in the Lakeland area. And we got involved in the case.
Wait, he was what, 18, 19?
He might have been 20.
He was quite young, and she was quite young.
Yeah, she was 18 or 19.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So they were a very young married couple, and had a volatile relationship.
Yeah.
She was supposed to come home from work, and she didn't make it home from work, and she is found a few days later in a ditch off I-4, stabbed to death, stabbed many, many times. And so naturally, when they looked to the people who were closest to the person, they had a volatile relationship, and so he's in the ringer for this. And it's a really circumstantial case. They don't have any evidence to directly implicate him, but he gets convicted and sentenced to life in prison. You have a number of years later, in about 2004, a set of fingerprints that were unknown. They were not Leo Schofield's or his wife's. They were in her car that was abandoned on the side of I-4, and they were near her blood that was found in the vehicle. They were put in the fingerprint database, the law enforcement database, and they hit to a first-degree murderer who's in prison named Jeremy Scott. And that led to a round of litigation I was involved in with Scott Cupp, Judge Cupp, who's on the podcast, and a number of other colleagues, Richard Bartman, Mike Minerva, Melissa Montel. And so we bring this forward, and the court rejects it, finding that Jeremy Scott's explanations that he was just walking along I-4 and lifting stereos from abandoned vehicles is how his fingerprint got in the car. So then in 2015, one of our other colleagues, Andrew Crawford, who's now representing Leo Schofield, he starts writing to people in prison, who Jeremy Scott being one, to see if they have any other information about the case. And Jeremy Scott writes back in the case that he has more information, and he ends up confessing to the crime. And that led to an additional round of litigation, which again you'll hear me on the Bone Valley podcast and examining him in court as a witness, where he confessed in court. He was a little back and forth. He was off his medications, but he ultimately, stuck to his confession. And this time, where the court found him credible before about his explanations for the fingerprint, now they found him not credible. And so Leo Schofield, we weren't able to overturn his convictions, but Judge Cupp and others
Schofield, I'm sorry, I was mispronouncing his name. Okay. Thank you.
And were able to achieve his release on parole in April of 2024, earlier this year. And so he's out now. And
that was after the podcast came out, though.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the podcast just had a huge impact because, obviously millions of people have listened to it, but, it was something that decision makers could listen to.
Sure.
And it's compelling and raises unbelievable doubt and questions about his convictions and why this guy was still in prison, and while right now he's still convicted, when someone else has confessed to the crime. Like at minimum, Leo should get a new day in court. He hasn't been
exonerated?
No, not yet. And so...
So tell us about that process then.
Well, first, I mean, he's on parole. And
he's on parole.
And so the big thing is, well, he's out, and that's great.
Yes.
And
yes.
First and foremost,
How long did he spend incarcerated?
35 years in prison. And so
his whole adult life almost.
Whole adult life.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing is, I think, first and foremost, how is he managing his return to society to get his, and he's good. And most people who get on parole have to go to a transitional housing, which I think people sometimes just want to go live with their families, but it's actually really beneficial to go to the transition housing because it allows them a glide path or a runway from the institutional environment to, what can be oftentimes a chaotic environment when you're fully
stressful. It's a lot just for somebody who's never been incarcerated. Right. I feel like it's too much some days, just everyday living.
And so I think, there will be efforts at the appropriate time to resume the effort to exonerate him. But, right now he's just, I think, appropriately focused on reintegrating, getting his life together.
Really? Mm-hmm. What was that like for you? What is it like for you? Because you've been there now. I don't know how many directly you've been involved with at the Innocence Project. But when somebody gets released, what is it like for you when you see them?
Well, it's so interesting because when you go and meet someone for the first time in prison to either interview them or take on their case, like that is the context in which you know them. And we have a different...
Prison's a horrible place. I visited a lot of people in prisons, and it is a horrible place.
Right. So you only get to understand a person. That's the context in which you understand them. And so when we get to walk them from the door of the jail, the door of the prison, or the door of the courthouse, and put them in the arms of their family, it's like a portal into a completely different world.
Right.
And I've had situations where mothers are speaking in tongues. I had a client who was reunited with his twin, and his identical twin.
Oh my gosh.
And, these sorts of things. And
identical twin.
Oh, no, sorry, not identical twin.
But it doesn't matter. Your twin.
And every one of those situations is different, and they're all wonderful. The cases that go deep into my core are the ones that, like, we open that letter that they wrote to us however many years before. And so to be with a person sometimes for a decade or more through all the ups and downs and the roller coaster of wins and losses and progress and setbacks, to get to that point it's something else. It's really hard to describe because it's a feeling of accomplishment and relief that it doesn't come about in a lot of other
circumstances. It is kind of there's a kind of grace that you are experiencing, and you've been on this journey with this person. I know grace is maybe the wrong term because that's a word technically that's used in death penalty cases, so I didn't mean it in that sense, but there's a, I don't know if you said otherworldly, but it must be people overuse the word surreal, but I think in this situation, maybe you've been on a journey with someone for a decade or longer, and to see the fruits of that work, it must really, I can't imagine something that could be more rewarding than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, and it's not just with the person. You get close to their
family, right?
And in many respects, you're giving them a new life. And the work begins. The real work begins at that point because reintegrating back into free society is extremely difficult. But it's a unique experience. It's a unique thing to really be involved in, and it's been a privilege and honor to be a part of it.
And we'll be right back with Seth Miller, the executive director of the Innocence Project of Florida. The news in haikus. This one was submitted by our guest, Seth Miller. We find injustice, innocent lives stolen, but the truth is revealed. Send us your news in haikus to podcasts with an S at e.newsserviceflorida.com. And we are back with Seth Miller. What's the biggest challenge that the wrongfully incarcerated folks face when they're released? The reintegration, you said, is difficult. I know it is, but what's the biggest challenge?
I mean, I think jobs, it's just very similar to a lot of anybody who gets out of prison. It's even someone who is fully exonerated. And we have all the goods to show, look, this person was actually innocent. The prosecutors agreed. There's still a stigma attached. And, people don't want to hire people who've been in prison, even exonerated folks. And so I think that it feels like a continuing injustice, a further victimization of individuals. Hey, I was exonerated. Why am I being prevented from working at the big lots? And I think it's hard for folks to understand that. And we are oftentimes kind of, explain to our clients, look, out here, you need to prove who you are as a person every single day. And the fact that you're in prison for 35 years, people are afraid of that.
Yeah.
Not everyone is going to be as open as your family or your friends or your lawyers. And so we have a transition services focus at our office. We have staff dedicated to that. And we say, look, we're here to help you. We're here to cut through this. We're here to help you get education and get job assistance and job training, to make sure you can get to all your appointments, make sure you have health insurance, all these sorts of things. And so it's a huge task. We spend like $100,000 a year helping all of our clients in all those areas to make sure they have the, a lot of the important needs met. And so much time just making sure they have access to the services. Because I think one thing that folks need to understand is that when someone is exonerated, we've disrupted the system. We get them out. They don't have access to a lot of the same services that someone does if they get out on parole or if they just finish their sentence.
Really?
And so
You mean there's like transitional services that are available to people who've completed their sentences or we don't have a lot of parole anymore.
I mean, there's still 5,000 people either in prison or parole eligible or under parole supervision, but relative to everyone else, that's right. I think that even in 2024, going into 2025 here, we have 30 or more years of experience with wrongful convictions, and yet the law hasn't really caught up to understanding that these folks are a unique subset of the incarcerated population, but need all the same and similar support that to make sure that they can make their way after they get out.
Would your legislation address that? Are you trying to get legislation passed that would, create special services for them?
I mean, we've tried before, and the I would say the political will hasn't been there, for example, to give people who, let's say, qualify under the compensation law, they meet the definition of actual innocence, give them access to state health care that we have, as a, not we, but others might have as state employees, right? Having access to health care.
That's important,
is so important.
Especially because prison is not a healthy place.
That's right. I mean,
you get really poor health care when you're in prison.
And we think about the definition of what makes someone...
No offense, Ricky Dixon, just saying.
I mean, you think about how we define someone who might be geriatric on the outside, and it's like a 15 years earlier for someone who's experienced
aging hyper rapidly.
The food is...
I've eaten the food, I know.
It's a disaster
it is.
in terms of diabetes and high cholesterol and too high salt intake, and it creates all kinds of problems. Dental care is horrific, and eye care not great, and so we've tried.
Hearing aids.
Yeah, hearing aids. I had a client who told me, I went to see him and I'm trying to talk to him, and I can't talk to him because he can't hear me. And I'm like, where's your hearing aid? And he's like, my battery ran out, and they just gave me another dead battery.
Oh,
it's like simple things like that.
Yeah.
The day-to-day dehumanization of people, of all people in prison, and so there's a lot to overcome.
in addition, you're an older person in many cases, and nobody wants to hire older people to begin with, or it's very difficult. It's more difficult to get a job because of ageism. Aside from the fact that you've got a 30-year gap on your resume, right? And your skill set, maybe you got training in prison, maybe you didn't. So it's a lot of challenges. I didn't realize that you all were involved on the post-release side, trying, doing services for them. That's great that you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it since 2006, and the reality was my predecessor, Jenny Greenberg, hired our first social worker, and she had the foresight to understand that we as lawyers are not equipped day to day to, like, we're the front line for our client. We're not a case manager,
right?
Yet
they need a case manager.
Our clients call us all the time with their problems, but we need someone who can focus solely on those day-to-day case management, week to week, month to month, so we can get to the next cases. Yeah. And so this year we're going into the new year in 2025, we're hiring another social worker. So expanding our capacity in that area.
The job situation, housing maybe also an issue. How long does it take generally? They have to apply within 90 days to get compensation. How long does it take? And how many of the people who have been released after being wrongfully incarcerated are eligible? I guess it's a lot of questions there, but what I'm getting at is how has this clean hands provision, and like how many people has that negatively impacted?
I mean, I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you that only about 15 to 20% of the individuals who've been exonerated in Florida have been compensated either through a claim bill or through the compensation law. It's only been 4 or 5 through the compensation law. So we've had a law for 16 years.
Wow.
That's only, it's excluded far more people than it's compensated. And so for the people who've been compensated, I think about James Bain, who we talked about before, Nathan Myers, who is the nephew and co-defendant of Clifford Williams, who you had mentioned.
That's right.
And both of them, it takes 6 to 8 months from when you file. It could take less time to get compensated. But the most interesting thing about Clifford Williams and Nathan Myers is that they were exonerated. They were wrongfully convicted together, spent 42 years wrongfully incarcerated for a murder that they didn't commit. And then they were exonerated together. And it was all done at the behest of the prosecutor's office from the conviction review unit. So
that was Jacksonville, right?
Yeah, there was no disagreement about their innocence. And yet, when it came time to get compensated, Clifford, who was like 15 years older than Nathan, he had two prior felony convictions from the 60s. Nathan, because he was only like 18 years old at the time, he didn't have any prior felony convictions. So you had this perfect example, of the problem with the clean hands provision, because Clifford had to get, legislators to sponsor his bills and had to get lobbyists and all this stuff. And Nathan just got compensated.
It's so crazy. We've been booking back and forth for several weeks working to get you on the show. And yesterday your phone, the pictures show up, picture of Clifford Williams in the Capitol with Representative Hart, I think it was. And some of the other representatives, and I got a chill because I remembered him. I appreciate when these bills pass, but it's kind of like I've been covering the Dozier compensation too. That whole, I'm going to say that whole humiliating process of having to come up and tell your story and tell it again, and certainly in the Dozier case.
And to beg.
And to plead. You're saying beg. I was going to say to plead, but thank you. Yes, to beg for
the largesse of the legislature.
Yeah.
We understand that claim bills are acts of grace, but to do this bit by bit instead of just creating a system that works for everyone, seems to be not the way we should be doing things. We should be looking for ways to efficiently get people the recompense that they deserve. And we're at a point now where we're not talking about cases where, like if you would ask me 15, 20 years ago, most of the exonerations, we weren't agreeing on the exonerations, and it might be over the objection of the states when they wanted court, and they reluctantly give up.
Okay.
And there were agreements back then too, but with the inception of conviction integrity units,
right.
We're finding cases and finding agreed resolutions. So you don't even have the optics of, well, this guy's innocent, the evidence proves it, but the prosecutor's using the compensation process
balking
to like get at them again. We don't really have a lot of that. So it's just, there's not a lot of political resistance.
Right.
We should just be finding ways to do this more quickly and more appropriately and not
more equitably.
No, equitably. Like we have to go to the legislature sometimes 2 or 3 years in a row. And that is 2 to 3 years longer than it would take to go through the statute if the person was eligible. And the big thing is that's 2 to 3 years oftentimes of lost stability. And we don't know how long these folks have left on earth. Clifford Williams only lived, just about 4 years, 3.5 years. From his exoneration.
He looked quite frail when he was walking the halls.
He was already older and he died of cancer. Yeah. And so I think we owe it to these individuals we've taken so much from to act with all due haste to make them whole.
Right. We talked about this a little bit. I wonder how well have the folks who've been wrongfully incarcerated and been released, whether they've been compensated or not, how well have they assimilated in general?
I think on balance, I would say most folks that I know who have been wrongfully convicted, incarcerated, and exonerated do well after they get out, with a lot of work. But like any other population, particularly in a formerly incarcerated population of returning citizens, there are folks that struggle mightily, and they struggle because some of them might have gone into prison with things that have been holding them back that are exacerbated by the incarcerative experience, and others might have developed struggles while they were in there. And so these are things that we with them have, and their families have, and their support systems have to work through. I mean, we've had clients who get addicted to drugs or alcohol, and then lose their license because they're driving under the influence in order to get to work, and now they can't get to work, right? Because they get the license suspended, and they drive anyway, so they end up back in jail because they just want to go to work, right? And so, they're in the same sort of, potentially in some of the same vicious cycles that any returning citizen might find themselves in. And our job at Innocence Project of Florida, with our transition services work, is to try to break them out of those cycles and help them build health and stability in all aspects of their life, so they can just have like a high level of functionality and really just enjoy the life that they didn't
thrive,
that they have now that they didn't have before, because we just want all of our clients to be happy and healthy.
Right. You talked about the conviction review unit in Jacksonville. There was an effort, I think some Democrats filed legislation that would have required all state attorneys to, I believe this is what the bill would have done, to have these conviction review units. Can you tell me a little bit, are you familiar with what, who has these and how effective they are?
Yeah, so just so your listeners understand, a conviction integrity or conviction review unit is a unit within a prosecutor's office who does a lot of the same work that we do. They're accepting requests for reviews of their cases, and they're using their resources within the prosecutor's office to do an independent look in the case. It's usually, when it's best predicated, it's a unit that is separate from the trial divisions and the appellate divisions that try to keep people in prison. The best ones report directly to the state attorney's office, so they're free of influence in the rest of the parts of the office, so they can investigate perhaps people who are already in the office.
Don't they have a motivation, before you go further? Is there resistance? You convicted someone, you prosecuted them, you presented evidence that may have been flawed, you relied on evidence that maybe was faulty. I mean, is there like a face-saving avoidance behavior that goes on in some of these prosecutors' offices? Or
I mean, I think that's definitely an issue in lots of places. I mean, I think the reason that they want to, the units that are best predicated, that are most successful, are the ones that have the most independence and are separate and independent from possible influences within the office to try to get them not to look into the things that office has done. And in this particular case, sometimes, if the case isn't so old, the person who was prosecuted that case, who might have wrongfully convicted someone, might still be in the office.
That's right.
And so,
and some prosecutors are around for a very long time.
And that never makes it easy, which is why I have a lot of admiration for the units that are so prolific in rectifying wrongful convictions, because those units, I mean, they're oftentimes, hated. In an office. I'm not talking about anything specific in Florida, but they are people who are disrupting what the office has been doing.
We made a mistake. We did this wrong. And the result of that mistake is very, it's horrific. It's life-changing. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you, other than death, is, being very, very ill. You're locked up. And so, they're not going to want to, a lot of people are not going to want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so in Florida, we have one in Jacksonville in the Fourth Judicial Circuit. So the Duval County, and I think Nassau and Clay County is the Fourth Judicial Circuit. We have one in Broward County in the 17th Judicial Circuit. And we had one in Tampa in the 13th.
And then
in Orlando, and then in Osceola in the 9th. But both those state attorneys got removed by the governor for other things the governor thought were offending. Right. And the people were put in place, I would say, certainly in Orlando, but to a lesser degree in Tampa, took steps to either close down or at least undermine the units.
Monique Worrell was reelected or elected, and so she will be taking office in January. Have you talked to her? Do you know if she's going to start another...
My hope is that she'll reignite the conviction integrity work in her office, because the reality is that we had ongoing work that we were doing collaboratively with that office. And again, this isn't like we're law partners. I mean, they have their own internal deliberations and considerations, but we were thinking about investigation of cases together, thinking about ways to resolve cases together, and all of that was disrupted when the unit was closed because of the change in leadership. And so the hope is that we can resume that, because the reality is that I think people in Florida, people anywhere, they want the different stakeholders to work together to reach just results. And if we can do that in a way that it doesn't take 10 years or 15 years, doesn't take all the resources, and we can get to the right answer more quickly, I think anybody with common sense would want that. And so, and it's the just thing to do, because there are people involved. And and so, you asked before whether there was a statute that said all state attorneys officers have to have it. It's not that, like, I'm in favor of the sentiment, but I think it's really important that any office that would have a conviction integrity unit really wants one.
I see.
And because,
you're right. That's a good point. Thank you for raising that.
And because it can't just...
Because if somebody's in a broom closet somewhere moving files around or, whatever, playing solitaire, that's not going to help.
No, because like with anything, you just want people who you can work with to get good things done.
Right.
And in some ways, an office that is forced to have one in name only, it can actually have negative effects in terms of people's, getting vindication, having their rights respected, losing opportunities to raise things in court because they've sent their case to the review unit who's just sitting on it.
Right.
And so I think the idea is to elect people who have political will within their offices to do these things because they want to do them.
Thank you. That was a thoughtful answer. If you were the king of everything, what one thing would you change in our criminal justice system?
I think if I had a choice, given what we know about the system, that we know that it moves a lot of people through it like widgets, I would choose to have a more just array of sentences assigned to things to not dispose of so many people.
So sentencing reform.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know that's outside the.
See, I thought you were going to say do away with the death penalty.
I mean, I would certainly do away with the death penalty,
Yeah.
but I, in terms of
that would have a much smaller impact than what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to diminish the fact that taking away someone's life is irreparable, and
yes.
so it's no wonder because of that. It's no wonder that the death penalty gets so much focus of people's justice efforts.
Yes,
it's a thing I care deeply about.
I know you do. That's why I thought. That's why I.
But if what I see from my
give
clients,
me an example. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me say, like what I see from my clients. We just did a program. We were going to do it in person in Tampa, and then like Hurricane Milton,
of course,
screwed us. Came the same week through Tampa, so we moved it to online. We called it Freedom's Canvas, and what it was focused on is the creative contributions of the wrongfully convicted. We did like storytelling. We did some visual art stuff, some music, and what I've kind of learned from my clients, from my small subset of clients, is there's so much creativity and human capital in prison that's lost for all of time and history. I mean, obviously people can still have some creative outlets while they're in prison, but so many people are in prison for life sentences. So many things are crimes, so many more crimes, maybe more than anywhere else in the country, get you automatic life sentences in Florida. And what you're saying is that this person who convicted a robbery with a gun where no one was injured, they're disposable. They're not worth.
Or if they were in the car when that happened.
Yeah, and
that's the thing that gets me a lot.
And
one of the things
I can't get my head around the willingness to just let go of people for eternity in that way. It seems to me that there's probably more to be gained with people having a second chance at life and contributing positively to society than just warehousing them for their entire lives, particularly when they go in at such a young age.
It says something about us as a society too.
It does. It I mean, and again, I'm not sure that we spend a lot of time thinking about it, because when we continually make more things crimes and make more crimes have more draconian sentences, I'm not sure we're really grappling with the impact of that, because it's really about a short-term political gain. I passed these laws that were tough on crime, and I can run on that now, and yet there aren't enough people to work in the prison, right? We're closing prisons because we don't have enough people to work.
We have the National Guard working in the prison. We have 300 Guard troops have been there for over a year, and they just announced they were going to be there, I think, for another 3 or 6 months or however long. I mean,
so they
lowered the age to have, you can be 18 years old and work in a prison. And still, and they did all kinds of whatever to make it attractive to people.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's like, I'm not, it's funny because I think some people would think I'm super curmudgeon-y. I'm
super curmudgeon-y. People know I am.
I'm really and truly an optimistic person who likes to assume the best in people, and maybe that's a tragic flaw, but I just from my experience of moving in and out of prisons for 20 years, there's a lot of great, wonderful people who are in prison who could be doing a lot of good for a lot of people if they weren't just sitting around doing nothing in prison. And so that's the thing I would change, is try to figure out how to change our laws to not throw people's life away as much as possible.
Yeah, because, when you're warehoused for the rest of your life or as a young person for 30 years or 40 years, what's your motivation to do well?
There's not a lot. I mean, I think for people who, religious and have, are people of faith, I think they can find motivations that maybe people who are not people of faith have a hard time doing, who are on life sentences, who don't have a lot to look forward to. But you talk about motivations, you see people who are in for life sentences, particularly from young ages, their disciplinary records are terrible.
Yeah.
Because who cares?
Right.
Not concerned about losing gain time that you're never going to use.
Right.
And I just think that, the programs that would be available to people if they didn't have a life sentence aren't available to those folks.
Oh, that's true.
Because
right.
why would we have betterment programs for people who are never going to get out? But we should have them for those people because they are living people.
Yeah.
Because they exist, and wherever they are, people have a yearning to be better, and we should support that. So I think it's just kind of a little bit upside down. I think that there's not enough understanding that if you are going to make a decision to take away people's liberty and put them somewhere, that you have a reciprocal responsibility then to create the best life possible in a situation that is carcerative and still punishment.
Do you have a certain case that you'd like to tell us about now that you're working on?
We have over 40 cases that we're working on. I mean, I think we have a couple that I'm not sure I will talk about, but that are hopefully going to pop here in the next 6 months. But we have been focusing a lot publicly on a case that is a little more dire. We have a client named Thomas Gilbert who is wrongfully convicted of a robbery gone bad in 1973 in Miami. So
before you were born, even.
Before I was born in 1979.
I was born.
And so I'm,
everybody knows. So I was already born.
So he's been in prison for over 50 years.
Wow.
And what's so unique about his case is that a number of people came forward, including the actual perpetrators, in 1977 to inculpate themselves and exculpate him. And in a really forward-thinking thing for 1977, the authorities in Miami did their own reinvestigation of the case, and they actually had all these other individuals who were in prison who said these other people confessed to the crime, and those people confessed to the crime to law enforcement, passed polygraphs, and yet they never did anything. And so they left Thomas Gilbert in prison, and now everyone's dead except Thomas Gilbert. And so we fully reinvestigated the case, figured it all out. We found one live witness who gave the perpetrators the gun and said that our client was not one of the two perpetrators.
Wow.
And we're ready to litigate the case, and our one live witness gets murdered.
No.
Yeah, and so we had to dismiss the case because the judge, who was really, I think, really open-minded and wanted to do the right thing, you can't move forward on evidence that doesn't exist, or that you can't bring forward.
What's
in the
his
court.
name?
Thomas Gilbert.
Oh, he must have been crushed.
Yeah, and so we've been doing.
How old is he?
He's in his early 70s, and so we've been doing some advocacy around his case, just trying to create some public support, because at this point, his health is failing him, and he's old, and we really just at this point want to get him home to his family. We'd love to exonerate him, but perhaps the best thing to do at this point is just get him out.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're working on. And he's been wrongfully incarcerated for over 50 years.
Wow. Is that the longest that you're aware of?
I mean, if he were exonerated, it would be the longest known wrongful incarceration as far as I know. But either way, I mean, it's his whole adult life in prison.
Wow.
And they've known since 1977 who committed the crime, and no one did anything about it.
That's just tragic.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you before we thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure having this time to chat with you. You mentioned about your walk on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, and I know people who've done that. I have friends who've done it. I've seen movies about it. I want to hear about do you mind? Do you want to
No,
tell us about your
it's just
experience? It is a life-changing experience. I know the people in it.
It's the one part of my brain is always thinking about it. So, yeah. So at the Innocence Project Florida, we are thankful that we have a bunch of really great policies, including a sabbatical policy. So after almost 18 years of the project, I took a 6-week sabbatical and decided to go walk the Camino de Santiago, starting in Saint Jean Pied de Port on the French side of the Pyrenees, and walked all the way across the northern part of Spain to Santiago, and then an additional 4 days all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And so
wow.
These are like traditional Catholic pilgrimage routes. I'm not Catholic nor religious, but
what did you leave? Did you leave something?
I left a stone at the Cruz de Ferro, which is the Iron Cross on the top of this hill, about 4 weeks into the walk, and it was cold and snowy, and I left a stone with the initials of Clifford Williams and my other client, Leonard Cure, who was shot by the cops in a traffic stop 6 months after he got compensated, and so in Georgia, and so
wow.
And so they had died earlier in the year, and I wanted to, I'm leaving a little bit of myself there so I could move beyond what had happened, and that was my way of doing it. And so, but it was a really great experience for me, and I met people from all over the world, and had a lot of opportunity to have a kind of deep social intimacy with people. When you're walking with someone for 6 or 7 or 8 hours, sometimes over multiple days, you can cover a lot of ground. And then there were days where I would walk all by myself and not see a single person, and be on top of a mountain and feel like I was the only person in the world. And that was interesting. And so it was a remarkable experience, and kind of changed the trajectory of my life in the sense that, I want to be more active. I want to take care of my health. I want to walk more Caminos and figure out a way to connect that with some of the reintegration work that we're doing with our clients, because I think it can have an incredibly healing quality to it.
There's a spiritual, whether you're religious or not, there's a spiritual component that you...
And it's hard, and it's not easy. I mean, obviously
I can't do it. I'm physically not able to do it.
I walked 575 miles in 36 days.
Yeah,
and
it's arduous.
But I think about the whole time. And really every moment of every day, I thought about, when it was hard, I'd say, well, my clients were able to be in prison for decades, and they had to put their feet on the floor every day, just like I'm going to do here. And all they could do is put one foot in front of the other and just keep moving forward and towards whatever the destination was going to be. And that was kind of my mantra. It's progress, forward movement, and you'll get to where you need to go.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of lessons from that. And so that's kind of, I'm hoping we can find a way to make this a thing for people who are wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, who come out to go on these long distance treks, get centered outside in nature, meet people from all over the world, have a unique experience.
What a healing, therapeutic way to join the world again.
Yep. And it's metaphorical too, because it's we did a campaign around my walk. I was on sabbatical. The people in the office.
I was getting the emails.
Yeah, I did a fundraising campaign to raise money for our transition efforts.
Yeah.
And all I had to do was walk and give them access to the photos and videos. But it was called Freedom to Walk, and so it's sort of people need freedom to go on their own journey, and as I was going on my journey, and so
wow.
You can't imagine just having the freedom of being able to just walk around or drive around,
right?
And what that means for someone who is incarcerated, particularly wrongfully incarcerated. So we hope to build on that, because it's something that I'm passionate about now, and it's.
I can see it in your face, and hear it. What surprised you? What was one thing that surprised you about that journey?
what surprised me is kind of how much stronger I was than I thought I was. I thought that it was hard, right? I mean, but I thought I would struggle.
With the blisters and everything.
So I didn't get any blisters.
You didn't? I've never met anyone who hasn't gotten blisters.
I didn't have any joint pain or anything like that. And I don't know if it's because of the way I planned or, the preparation or all of that, but I just,
but
I could feel myself getting stronger all the time.
That's interesting.
And there were things that if I had to do them on the first day, it would have been hard, but, elevation and things like that. 3 weeks in, I was just attacking it. And it was just different. It was like a mindset, and I think the thing for me that was maybe most surprising, because I would say when it comes to consistent physical activity, I've been traditionally a bit lazy, is that every single morning I was excited to get up and walk.
Oh, wow.
And except the last day. And it was honestly like the hardest day, not because it was like there was anything particularly hard about it, but because my head wasn't all that in it, and that was kind of how I knew it was time to go home. And so
I've heard that from other people too, that their heart told them when it was time to go home.
Yeah, I mean, it was also like,
I don't mean physically their heart.
It was like really hot, and it didn't have a lot of like tree cover, and it was kind of exposed. I was running out of water, and I'm like, man, it was like going uphill. But there was a moment the night before where I thought maybe I'll just take the bus back to Santiago and go home. And I decided to get up and walk. I'm glad I did, but it was the first day I felt that way. And so, but to the 35 days before, to be like, I'm getting up and I'm going.
That's cool.
And it was just a different me. And
That's
so
cool.
It was really exciting to find that version of myself.
That's really cool. Well, the last question I have is, what is one thing about the Innocence Project that you think people should know that you don't think they know?
I think most people don't know how we're like structured, like the types of people that we have work at our project. And I think most people don't know that we're multifaceted. No one knows about our reentry work.
I didn't know.
Yeah. And so, and so it's like we're always trying to educate people about the scope of the work we do, but also, we're, we have investigators on our staff. All they do is go out and find witnesses and talk to witnesses to develop new evidence in cases. We have social workers, we have paralegals, not just lawyers, right? And then we have our staff of individuals who don't do legal work, but drive the awareness and communications and fundraising work that is really, really necessary to give us the resources to provide our clients the high quality representation they need. And so in many respects, it's like a nonprofit law office, but multidisciplinary with really passionate people who are still quite young. I mean, I took over when I was, I came at 26, took over at 28, and I'm finally like the second oldest person in the office. And I feel like for the first time, I'm like appropriately placed as the director and a little bit older. And so it's always fun to continue to,
you're the elder.
Yeah, to continue to find young, passionate people who have a different kind of energy to add to the mix. Yeah, and we're just here in Tallahassee doing the tough work all over Florida, all 67 counties.
Well, Seth Miller, Executive Director of the Innocence Project of Florida, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to have you back, and thank you for all the good work that you and your team do.
Thank you so much, and it's been wonderful to spend this time with you. It's been enjoyable.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida, hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam, and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC.